This is Bruce from Red Raven Computing Studios, hoping you're having a good day. And in this video, I'm going to talk about mobile development specializations. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about are some of the platforms and tools before I actually get into the actual specializations. Now, the first tool or platform I'm going to talk about is the iOS platform. The iOS platform is basically Apple's mobile platform. These are called your iPhones, your iPads, Apple Watch, and these use programming languages of Swift and Objective-C. Swift is the new language, Objective-C is the old language, and you can use some C++, like if you're going to do computer vision or something like that, which needs to be a little bit more detailed. You can get into the C++. You'll need to use Mac OS, and it uses the Xcode IED. So you open up Xcode, you write your code in Xcode, and compile it in Xcode, and that's how you get started with iOS. Android is Google's mobile OS platform that runs on many different OEM platforms. OEM stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer. So like Samsung, LG, yeah, are different companies that make smartphones that run the Android operating system. And Android uses Java as its primary development language. Some C++ can be written using the NDK or Native Development Kit, but most of it is done in Java. And Android Studio is the primary IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment, which is what you use to write Android code in. Now, before that, they used Eclipse. Eclipse used to be the IDE that you use to write Android OS. And these Android Studios can run on any OS, so you can run on Windows, Linux, Mac OS. Now, the Windows Phone is the third platform we're going to talk about. And Windows mobile operating system, basically, that runs on mobile devices. Microsoft Visual Studio is used to develop Windows Phone apps, which you need on Windows OS. But the Windows Phone market is very low, so less than 5% of the market shares to some reports. And I'll show you one of the resources I use to get the marketing. So if you go here, and this is one of the resources I'm going to have, and I'll put the link of description, the link of this in the description. But if you look here, you can see right here, 2016 quarter 3. Android is kicking butt. iOS and then Windows has a very low market share. So mostly people who do Windows Phone development are hobbyists. So I wouldn't really want to rely on a career if you're going to do mobile development. I would seriously suggest Android and iOS. iOS, even though it has 12%, 13% market share, according to this report, it still dominates in in-app purchases and people who buy apps. People who tend to buy Apple products tend to actually pay more for the applications and the software that runs on their Apple mobile devices. So Apple is still a viable market. Now, some of the tools that you may run into is a hybrid. A hybrid approach uses web technologies to develop apps like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the tools are like PhoneGap, Cordova, Ionic, React Native is one, and at least compile the code to be able to run on mobile platforms, and it can be compiled for both iOS and Android. To me, though, the hybrid approach, I played around with it some, used it some, but it's just the results seem to be very cheapened. It looks very cheap to me. It feels that way, especially on the older devices, as the HTML stuff has to be compiled on top and run through an engine to compile it to the native code to run on these devices. So it's good if you want like a single code base that you can have basically web developers be able to manage. But for look and feel and more reaction, I personally like the native development. Another one is Xamarin. Now, Xamarin is interesting because it's a tool that allows you to write both iOS, Android, and Windows Phone apps in C Sharp. And you must have a Mac OS to test iOS apps or write iOS apps in Xamarin to compile it, and you must have a Windows OS to test and run Windows Phone apps. Just how the platforms are. This allows you to both compile iOS and Android apps to have a similar code base in C Sharp that is close to native. So you can write like a single code base. And the thing with the hybrid in Xamarin is mostly because you can have a single code base for both um, iOS and Android. And this is why some people go with these routes, is for that single code base, easier to manage. You don't have to manage two code bases, which Android and iOS are very radically different if you're to develop natively for both of those platforms. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is mobile development specializations. Now, when I did a research on this, I didn't find very much information. I found is information like mobile development as a specialty, but not what can you do within mobile development specializations. And so I could compile this to try to give some idea of what type of specializations you can do with the mobile development. And so these are not in any particular order, even though I number them. These are just things I put up to think that may give you some insight to help you choose a specialization when you become or are a mobile developer. The first one I will suggest is like a mobile video game developer, and obviously this is somebody who makes video games on the mobile platform like iOS or Android. So they might use engines and stuff like Unity or Unreal to make the games, and they might use graphic software, sound software to make resources, so like Photoshop, Blender, GarageBand, anything like that. Or they might get resources from musicians and graphic designers and people else who made the images, and they just implement them. So this is somebody who specializes in making mobile games, essentially. Then I think of another one as a social media mobile developer. So this person develops from social media platforms using examples like Snapchat, Periscope, Facebook, Minds.com, Twitter. So they write apps for mobile social media. And so with this, you have to have some knowledge with back-end programming a little bit. Databases are very extremely helpful, or you can use a third-party service like Firebase to manage data. So with a social media application, is you have to keep track of data so that it shows up on the device on the client side. So when someone does a post or like, it shows up and it shows up to everyone. So back-end services is needed. And because you need a backend service to help manage data, you'll need to make a lot of web API calls. You need to call the internet a lot of time to get your information and to load it in your device. So then the next one I thought of is what we'll call an e-commerce mobile developer. This is a developer that focuses on making service on the mobile platforms that sell physical goods or services. So examples I think of is like eBay, Uber, Airbnb, any e-commerce site that uses a mobile platform to make some sort of sale, something that is used not in the physical world, not in the digital world. So an example of Uber, you basically order a ride and someone physically shows up and gives you a ride to your destination. Airbnb is like housing, and eBay is like you bid on an object and you actually get something physical or tangible. So obviously you're going to need to make some web API calls. It's most likely going to be needed, and you're going to be able to need to use financial services or figure out how to integrate financial services so that the user can pay for these services. PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Pay, credit cards. You're going to have to be able to integrate with those and be able to accept those forms of payment so that the user can pay for those goods and services. Now another one is a mobile developer for the Internet of Things. Now the Internet of Things is going to be a very big deal, and it's somewhat here. The Internet of Things is basically your environment being embedded with microprocessors, and you're starting to see this more and more as we go in the future. Smart homes is part of the Internet of Things. So someone who does a mobile developer for the Internet of Things is somebody who uses the mobile device to connect to other electronic objects. It's very good for smart homes, like I said, or flying drones, to fly a drone, or to see a camera on a drone or something like that. Hearing aids. I mean, the possibilities are endless, really, with this. You can also use the mobile phone as detection. People pay their train passes or subway passes in certain places with their mobile phones, and that's all part of this Internet thing ecosystem. Now, a knowledge of electrical engineering here would be very, very useful as you're connecting to other electronic devices. So knowing electrical engineering and having an understand of how electrical systems work, how data works, and how it interties, not just computers, but actually how electrical systems, how microwaves travel through the air, and how things communicate with each other is very, very useful. So in this, if I was having a business that dealt with like interconnecting with things like this, I would take an electrical engineer over a computer science for this type of position or this type of thing, just because an electrical engineer will have a much more broad knowledge set on electrical systems and how they work than a computer science person would. So this thing very heavily in understanding how things communicate, how electrical systems and stuff can communicate. Very interesting, very thing. Multimedia mobile developer. This is another one I come up with, which is a specialty that focuses on creating media-rich content to be consumed. So, an example might be like TV, radio program shows, news, magazine applications, celebrity fan news, things like that, where you have some sort of streaming video, podcasting, streaming radio system, anything like that. APIs really would be called heavily because you need to not constantly publish an app for every new content. So you want to fetch the content from a server or some other information. And depending on if it's just a text based, you won't need this. But if you use video, audio, so you need to understand that development to be able to use that to develop and make multimedia rich applications. Next one I think is a very interesting for mobile developer or mobile in general is mobile security. And this is going to become more and more important. A lot of mobile apps tend not to have any security on them. And so the data is wide open and easily to grab. So a mobile security specialist would be somebody that basically works on securing mobile networks and applications. They will have to have the understanding of hacking and web security is very importantly needed, and knowledge of encryption, digital certificates, other things that deal with security and making a system secure and making an mobile application secure for that is very important. I see mobile security becoming very, very important in the future, particularly in defense and government type of sectors, as well as private sectors. But this one will really grow more and more important. Then next one I put on is medical mobile developer. This is a person who's going to be focusing on the medical industry. So such apps can connect patients to doctors, reminders of medicines, keeping track of a doctor's schedule, drug doses, things like that. Very used for the mobile medical field. You must know some mobile security as well because you're dealing with medical information and you want to keep that secure and be able to work with databases and backend services using web API calls. It's going to be kind of important, especially if you think of like an integrated system of a hospital and you are adding mobile systems like iPads for the doctors, for instance, that connects to the system and that keeps all the data for the doctors. And so when they go to the patient, instead of taking a paper clipboard and looking at that, they could take up an iPad and they could scan an iPad for a patient. We could see all the patient's information, what medicine was being used, what he's being treated for, all the information there. So this is also going to be a big industry, as the medical industry is quite huge industry, and this can be very, very popular and will probably grow as time goes on. Then I have one that's called brick and mortar mobile development. Now, what this is this is a developer who focuses on apps and digital services for businesses that are not traditionally digital businesses, such as restaurants, stores, so like retail, things like that. People who have physical locations who rely on their physical location for their business. So this is very similar to an e-commerce mobile developer, but it's to support an existing business. So, like if you're in a restaurant, right, you might allow people to pay for food for a particular restaurant or location or restaurant or chain, or be able to basically reserve seating at a particular restaurant or club or some sort of business that exists in the physical world that's not used primarily digital world. So this is very popular. Usually people who do brick and mortar businesses is not just a mobile developer, not just a mobile space, but also the web space, because a lot of these businesses are small businesses, mom and pops, or small franchises and chains, and they need a full service development. So you got to be able to develop a website for them that supplies similar needs that they need, as well as backend services, databases, things like that. But this could be a very lucrative market, particularly for freelancers who want to freelance, because you can easily find small businesses that you can say, hey, I could build you a mobile app for this, or I could build you a full digital service for this. A lot of work to build a full digital service, but like I said, could be very lucrative for a freelancer to get into this market. Another one is the financial mobile developer. Now, this is somebody that develops apps and develops things for the financial industry, dealing with bankers, stock and trading, real estate, loans, other financial services. So these individuals are usually people who want to work in the financial sector who don't want to be banker or stock traders. Somebody who maybe wants to know that information about the financial sector, maybe wants to know about accounting or something like that, but not necessarily want to work directly in it. And so this type of person would be someone who wants to get into the financial sector without being a banker or stockbroker. This is also a very lucrative market. The financial industry tends to pay a large amount of money compared to other industries for services. So something that's in a high demand right now is the financial services, and these banking companies tend to try to reach out to other existing companies for consulting, like TCS, Tata Consulting Services. It's a big one that has been spamming my inbox. Not TCS directly, but a lot of recruiters spamming my inbox for TCS right now for this financial market right now, particularly in areas like New York and Texas and some other areas where they have a lot of financial services. And the last one I'm going to call is a SaaS and utility mobile developer. So these is kind of like two things I put into one. A developer that's a utility developer develops apps that provide some sort of utility to individuals. An example of a utility app is a calculator app. I know it's a very dumb example, but it works and you can understand. So, I've seen some pretty interesting utility apps. I saw a utility apps for shooters, people who use firearms. The app basically helps them gauge distance, windage, bullet drop. How much powder they need in their round, their casing, and it's very detailed. And and the shooter can keep track of his loads and things like that. And so there's a depending on what utility. I mean, you can have a utility for carpenters that can help them measure angles and things like that. So there's lots of them that can do. And then SAWS I put up there because SAWS is software as a service, and usually you have a back-end server or something, and it's usually through website. So the current company I'm working at right now has kind of a SaaS business. They basically have a web application that allows people to allows third-party shippers to use that to allow their clients to make shipments. And so they use the software at my current company to make shipments, and when you pay for our software, usually as a recurring uh, recurring subscription. Another example of a SaaS is QuickBooks Online. You know, you pay so many dollars a month to use this software online to manage your system. You can apply this to the mobile space as well, depending on the service and so like that. So hopefully this gives you guys some insight of some possibilities of specialization as mobile developer, and you can eventually launch off and be able to have some understanding and be able to know some ideas of some skill sets that you will need to pursue to specialize in some sort thing as a mobile developer, whether it's security or video game development. And hopefully this helps you guys out. I will talk to you again on my next video.